Fuck around, make my 40 pop.
Boruto episode 210 review. Alright guys, this episode right here was super serious. I really liked it. I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys liked it as well. The first thing that I do want to talk about though has to be the Kada Organization scene that we did see at the first scene of this Boruto episode. Now I talked about this in my preview and my spoilers. I talked about how I did expect to see some Kada Organization members in this actual episode, but I didn't necessarily expect to see this specific scene right here. For example, this scene right here is in chapter 45 of the Boruto manga. We still, as of right now, haven't really adapted fully chapter 44. So the Boruto anime, they're getting a little bit freaky. They're getting a little bit unique in their actual adaptation. So it's cool. I don't necessarily mind it as long as we did get to see some Kada Organization content in this actual episode right here. I was fine. But regardless, a couple of interesting things that they did say in this scene. The first thing being is that Jigen actually said that they moved the coordinates of that actual dimension with the 10 tails. One of the interesting questions that I've seen a lot of people ask is why haven't Naruto and Sasuke actually moved on that dimension? So they can't necessarily get there anymore. Now, not only that, Delta also said something very interesting, which is like power scaling wise is kind of cool, but not necessarily much. I'll explain it a little bit. In this specific episode right here, Delta actually did say that Boro was actually destroyed. Now, obviously, we understand, we've seen exactly what happened, but Jigen actually asked Delta if it was Sasuke, and Delta replied no, it was a greater force or a greater power than Sasuke. Now obviously there's a very good chance that everybody here kind of thinks that BoruShiki is actually stronger than Sasuke, but now it's like kind of being confirmed by one of the Kada Organization members. Now I do want to point out, we have to take this with a little bit of a grain of salt, mainly because it's coming from Delta. If this information was coming from like per se a person like Sasuke or even Jigen or Kashin Koji, it'd have a little bit more weight behind it. But we do have to remember when Delta actually went at Naruto, she thought that she could beat Naruto, so she kind of underestimated her opponent. She kind of underestimated the power level of certain ninjas, so we can't necessarily think that she knows 100% how strong a character like Sasuke is. But regardless, I personally believe that the writers are probably telling us this to kind of let the audience know that hey, BoruShiki is actually stronger than Sasuke, which would be absolutely insane. Obviously, if that is the case, BoruShiki is then stronger than Naruto. And remind you guys, BoruShiki was essentially like running extremely low on chakra. Like imagine BoruShiki with full chakra, that would right there would be absolutely different. But this right here was definitely interesting. I do want to know what you guys think about that in the comment section below. Do you guys actually think that Delta was speaking the gospel, or do you guys think that Delta is a little bit delusional and BoruShiki is definitely not stronger than Sasuke? But into the actual episode. Now again, I talked about this a little bit earlier. This episode right here was a very serious episode. This right here is something that we didn't necessarily get to see in the Boruto manga. An interesting aspect of this is the fact that Boro, being the cult leader, you have to understand if he does eventually die, there's going to be some sort of fallout within the cult that he's actually presiding over, and that's exactly what happened. There was a lot of denial in this episode, rightfully so. I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, talking about how they probably were just going to dismiss this as like a rumor, but it turns out that Konohamaru and Sai did a very good job in this episode actually convincing people that hey, this right here is the case, you need to listen to us, and here's where you were wrong. And the surprising part was some of the members of the cult were actually in on board, deceiving everybody. Like what the hell was going on? Like especially that one guy that actually ran into the room to actually see if Boro was alive and actually lied to the people of the cult, basically telling them that hey, your brother's gonna come back soon, and knowing that he's not gonna come back. That right there was absolutely crazy. But one of the things that was kind of made clear, or not necessarily made clear, but one of the things that was kind of hinted towards the end of the actual scene was the fact that Boro, even though it looked like he was doing a lot of bad things on the surface, he might have been actually doing it for some very righteous means. For example, we understand that the infinite Tsukuyomi in itself, it was supposed to be exactly what Boro thinks it was supposed to be, but it really wasn't that. Now obviously, if Boro still believes in that actual ideal, then he probably thinks that that right there is going to be the right way to go. But how he was getting there probably wasn't necessarily the most righteous means. Like he's deceiving people, making people sick, killing people. It just didn't necessarily look good on Boro's part. Now the character of Boro, in my personal opinion, I think it was good. The reason why a lot of people aren't necessarily going to like it is because Boro's character wasn't necessarily totally fleshed out. And the reason why I believe Boro's character wasn't necessarily totally fleshed out, and I definitely do support this idea, is because Boro's ideal was the same thing that Madara's ideal was, even though they actually, went about it differently. Of course, obviously, we're not necessarily going to say Boro was on the same level as Madara or anything like that. But what we do have to understand is that they're essentially trying to do the same exact thing. If they would have fleshed Boro's character out a lot more, it would have kind of been a little bit repetitive. And obviously, Boro is not one of the main characters. Of course, Ishiki, Otsutsuki, Jigen, Kashin Koji, characters like that, we want to see those characters, not necessarily Boro. So them not necessarily fleshing out Boro's character, I completely understand it. Now, as I said earlier, Konohamaru and Sai in this episode, they were very good. Now, I want to point this out. At this particular point, I don't necessarily have a problem with Konohamaru anymore. I have a problem with the Boruto writers. The Boruto writers, they're trolling, bro. They have to be trolling, bro. First things first. During the scene where they confronted that one guy that was actually trying to call Boro, when he tried to escape, he picked up a vial with the virus in it and threw it at Konohamaru. Now I want you guys to understand this. If the guy would have just ran out, it would have served the scene fine. But then no, he throws something at Konohamaru and Sai, and it only hits Konohamaru. Bro, the writers hate Konohamaru, bro. I'm convinced. They could have hit Sai. It would have had the same impact. But nah, they just chose. Bro, I'm telling you, bro, they hate Konohamaru, bro. It's a done deal. But Konohamaru was on go in this episode, and it was kind of one of the funniest scenes, I'm not gonna lie. It was a scene where Konohamaru and Sai were actually being surrounded by the people of the cult, and then out of nowhere, it's like Konohamaru was about to massacre all of them, like, yo, and then Sai had to have him chill out, like, yo, what are you doing, bro? These guys aren't ninjas. But I'll be completely lying to you guys, if I didn't necessarily want to see Konohamaru and Sai actually get active in this episode, I definitely want to see it, but obviously there wasn't necessarily anybody in this particular episode for them to actually battle. But one goat pulled up to the scene, which was Delta. Now obviously we understand that Sai and Konohamaru, they're not necessarily fighting Delta, they're not coming close to Delta. At this particular time, they did the correct thing. All they could do at this particular point was just hide, try to get people out of the building, and make sure that they weren't necessarily seen by Delta herself. What we understand is that Delta is actually alive, she's actually out, she's thugging. Konohamaru and Sai, they were completely confused, man, because they thought that Naruto had actually finished her off. That right there wasn't the case. One of the things that I do want to talk about for Delta specifically is that she had that aura in this episode. As soon as she showed up, everybody was shook. And in fact, in this episode, Konohamaru himself almost died. I wouldn't necessarily say my man's Konohamaru was simping anything, but he was actually trying to sit there and actually reason with people and try to get them outside of the actual building, because obviously the building was falling. It just didn't work out. They didn't want to leave, and Delta's photon beam came literally like feet away from Konohamaru. If Delta would have aimed it at Konohamaru, that would have been it for Konohamaru. Like, he would have actually been done. There was no way that Konohamaru would have actually been able to dodge that. He doesn't move at light speed. So I'm super happy that he's actually alive. If I didn't necessarily have the stance that I do have right now, that the writers are just trolling Konohamaru at this particular point, I wouldn't necessarily say that last statement. But regardless, this episode right here, in my personal opinion, was definitely a very good episode. It was very, very serious. And of course, the next episode, in my personal opinion, is probably not necessarily going to be as good as this. But the episodes after that, man, when they actually start to adapt the Boruto manga, is going to be a completely different story. Hopefully we do get to see some more Kada Organization movements in the next episode, because every single time we see the Kada Organization, I don't know, something happens. Everybody gets excited when we see the Kada Organization. But let me know what you guys think about this episode in the comment section below. Did you guys like it? I personally liked it, especially the appearance of the Kada Organization, as I said, and especially Delta. But also, what do you guys think about Boro as a whole? Like, did you guys like his character? Did you guys like how the anime actually expanded on this character? Let me know what you guys think. But it's been your boy Baara, and we out.
It's a knife.